It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are, of course, listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I am delighted that you are here. I appreciate it very much. A lot of positive comments about the last episode and the ARC protest. Had great fun. Thank you for all the kind words about that show. The introduction comments here are going to be a little bit shorter because I've got more stuff already done and ready for the show. A little later on, we are going to talk to another podcaster. His name is Curt Carstensen, and we're going to talk all about his cool show, and you can learn all about him and his show during that interview, so I won't spoil it all now. I also have two, investing skeptically segments this week. I really only want to do one, but sometimes things come up. The one that I had planned was actually a nice and short one. It was about index funds, and are they too big? Are they destroying everything? Is there a pending doom coming because everyone is using index funds? So a little bit of commentary on that. And the one that has just come up is a little more complicated. Some of you are going to love it. Some of you may not love it. It's about currency hedging your stock and or bond investments in international investing spheres, arenas, things, items, whatever. So we're going to talk about whether you should use currency hedging for your investments. And just one quick short thing in case you don't listen to that segment. You personally, listener, you should not be doing currency hedging. The fund, hopefully an index fund that you use, should be doing the currency hedging if any currency hedging at all is suggested. So check that out. And of course, we'll do the wrap up on the other side. And I appreciate you being here. And I almost forgot. I'm so glad I stalled just a minute here. Okay, we're going to have a meeting. So if you listen to the show, we're going to have a meeting. And it's going to be in October 17th, 2019, in case you're listening to this in 2020 or later, 2019, for the Center for Inquiries Conference in Vegas. It's called SciCon, CSICON, SciCon, which, by the way, I mentioned previously, me, Polaris, Phil Ferguson, whatever, we are going to be a sponsor for this convention. We're working on the details. I should have all that available to you soon. But on Thursday, October 17th, 2019, which is the first day of the conference, and there's a lot of workshops in the afternoon. Right after the workshops end, and the current schedule, I'm going to have to go on the current schedule, so hopefully it doesn't change. All of the workshops end at 4 o'clock. So if you want to go to one or two or more of the workshops, do your thing. If you're just arriving on Thursday and checking into your hotel and you can still meet us and you're not doing workshops, that's fine too. We are going to meet at 4:15 in front of the registration desk for the conference itself. And that is going to be within the Flamingo Casino Hotel in Las Vegas. So we're going to meet at 4:15, and at 4:30, we are going to leave the building. So if you want to find us after that, that's fine. But we have a limited time window here, so we cannot wait for Strangler. So at 4:30, we're going to leave, and we're going to go out of the building, and we're going to go south across Flamingo Road, and there's a shopping area there called the Grand Bazaar Shops. And towards the back of the Grand Bazaar Shops, close to the entrance to Bali's casino, there is a Wahlburger restaurant. And so each person can get whatever they want to eat. It's pay on your own. I'm not going to pay for food for 50 people in this situation, so my apologies. But if you want to have something fun to do to join a bunch of people that listen to the show or know the show or just want to bring your friends, like I said, we're going to sneak out at 4:30, go over to the Grand Bazaar shops and eat at Wahlburger. Hopefully the weather is beautiful, if not too hot. It is October, so we should be okay. And get whatever you want to eat. We'll hang out. And then after we're done eating, we're going to turn around, and right next to Wahlburger is my favorite bar in all of Vegas. It's called the Fuel Bar. And they're famous for high-powered drinks. And if we're lucky, if we're really lucky, we can get some buy one, get one free coupons. Don't tell anybody. But they also do kind of like the movie Cocktail, where they throw bottles back and forth and flip them over their heads and catch them behind their backs, and they make you a nice drink. So we can get some food, and we can have a drink or two, and then we take the 5 to 10 minutes to walk back to the Flamingo, and at 7 p.m. is the opening reception for SciCon, the Center for Inquiries Conference. So again, this is in Las Vegas, October 17th. We start meeting at 4:15 in front of the registration desk for the conference. And at 4:30, we're going to go south to the Grand Bazaar shops. We're going to look for Wahlburger. So if for some reason you miss us at 4:30, it's 4:45, and you had to change or do something, run across the Flamingo Road, go south to the Grand Bazaar shops, look for Wahlburger, and come join us for some food. And then, like I said, right after, we'll eat at the Fuel Bar. And I have every expectation that we'll make it back into the casino by 7 o'clock to join everybody else at the conference for the opening reception. So hopefully you can make that. Enough of this. We're going to go into the really good stuff of the show. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about hedging, and specifically currency hedging. And this is going to be kind of a more advanced topic. So we're not talking about simple things like what is a stock, what is a bond. We're going to talk about hedging currencies and why you should or maybe should not do them. It is one of those things that I get emails all the time asking about all kinds of different stuff. But in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of emails about currency hedging, and I'm not quite sure what inspired that, because maybe it was 6 or 9 months before or since the last time I've gotten one, and now I've gotten several of them. So something is going on that creates this demand, this interest. And so I figure I would hone my education and skills and knowledge, and did a little research myself to make sure I have a increased probability of knowing what I'm talking about. So I want to go over some of these things and talk about how they can affect your portfolio. At least one, maybe two of the questions came from people that are in countries outside of the United States. So first, I'll give my warning. I am not registered in any country other than the United States of America. I do not consider myself an expert in any of these countries whatsoever. But I got some questions, so I'm going to take a stab at them, or at least sending them to directions where maybe they can find more information. A lot of this I did research and came up with information from Vanguard, because despite my previous segment on Vanguard doing something stupid, they are still my favorite. So I will have links in the show notes that you can go read these. One of them is a pretty short and simple web post from Vanguard, which talks about the value of hedging currencies on international bond funds. And it's a pretty good and pretty easy read. And I think virtually everyone who listens to this show can handle it. The second one is much more complicated. I mean, it has, how many pages is this? 21 pages, 22 pages, 21 pages of graphs, charts, details, formulas, statistical analysis. It was pretty rough for even me to go through. So you may or may not get a lot of value out of that, but that's okay. Go check it out, skim through it, see what you think. The nice thing about the longer one is that it talks about the specific effects of hedging currencies, or currency hedging strategies in the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, And I know one of my emails was from someone in Canada, and so they might find that particularly helpful. So got to break it down into a couple things. First, I'm going to talk about if you are in the United States. So if you are in the United States, I generally recommend a portion of your portfolio be international stock. And there's no hard and fast rules, but generally in the industry, a global fund will have stock from many countries, if not every country they can, globally around the world. International stock funds generally will be the exact same, except they don't have the United States. Those are the funds I like to use. I don't like global funds because I already have a system and a process and a strategy for investing in the United States if you are a United States citizen. So why muddy that up? Why create duplication? Why create lack of clarity in your investment options by getting a global fund that has some of the same stocks that you're now trying to differentiate from by having an international fund? An international stock fund, the effects caused by currency fluctuations. So if you're in the United States and you have an international fund, you have stock in United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Chile, all over the world. You have all these. And all of those currencies go up and down at different rates compared to the dollar. So the single biggest driver is the change of the dollar itself. Also, since they're stock funds, they can be quite volatile on their own. The United States stock market has a couple of times lost 50% in a year or two and made as much as 200 or 300% in 4 or 5 years. So the currency fluctuation is not huge compared to the amount that the stocks can go up and down. And thankfully, this was very nicely reconfirmed with the longer Vanguard paper that I'm going to have the link in the notes for, that in the long run, those currency fluctuations generally have not been that big of a deal. Again, this is for a U.S. investor in an international stock fund. So you don't have to worry about currency hedging that much. It is expensive, so it adds an expense ratio. You can get a hedged fund. But one of the neat things about them is that it kind of works out in the end. And since your stock part of your portfolio is meant for long-term investing, those year-to-year fluctuations not only don't particularly bother me, but they can create an opportunity for rebalancing. So if the dollar changes in value compared to the rest of the world and makes international stock fund jump 30 or 40% when all of your U.S. domestic stocks go up only 10 or 12%, there's an opportunity for you to scrape off some of that cream. And if you're in retirement, you could use that to pay your bills that year because you just made a ton of money in that one particular segment. Or you can pull a little bit off and redistribute it back to the United States to keep your balance in place. The difference may not be enough in an average year to do that. It might only happen once every 5 or once every 10 years, but it's a nice thing to have. The opposite can, of course, be true, that if the U.S. stock market just crushes it for 2 or 3 years in a row and international falls behind, which has been our current situation, I then am more inclined to put more money internationally. So its volatility is different than just owning U.S. stocks. So overall, your net volatility can decrease. It might increase, but the net effect is not really a concern for me. It creates an opportunity where one or more of your stock investments vary from the other stock investments that you have. And so it creates an opportunity in rebalancing for you to make a little bit more money in the long run, and it creates the possibility of the rebalancing, dollar cost averaging into different asset classes as they change in relationship to each other. So a U.S.-based investor investing in an international stock fund, I'm not worried about hedging. I'm kind of even leaning towards not hedging. So next, we have a U.S.-based investor and their bond portfolio. A portion of your bond portfolio can be international bonds and or slightly riskier and higher returns emerging market bond index fund. In both of those cases, I'm insisting that you have a currency hedge in the fund. You are not going to go do that personally. At least I don't have the capacity to explain to you how one would do that personally because I don't know. But you want your fund to do that because the purpose of the bonds is to be there when stocks go down. And so you want the stability. And also in the shorter document from Vanguard, and this is on their website, Vanguard.com, it's called A Portfolio Stabilizer Global Hedged Bonds. So you could Google it that way if you wanted to. And basically, it's talking about the dramatic reduction in volatility in bonds when they're hedged against currency exchange rates. So a couple of things go in play here. That bond returns currently are small compared to what they've been in the past. 2, 3, 4, 5% if you're taking a little bit more risky stuff. And the currency exchange rates can have a much more dramatic effect on those returns, to the point that they're as volatile as much change as a stock investment might have, but it's part of your cushion, so you don't want that. Again, it raises the expense ratio a little bit because someone has to go through the hassle and the expertise and the expense of hedging the fund, but you want to make the bond returns. You're not doing a stock investment. You're not doing a currency investment. You're not investing in currency fluctuations, which is something I don't recommend in general. So why do it with your international or emerging market bond fund? Additionally, since they're a small part of your portfolio, it's not going to be a really big problem if they fluctuate a lot, but I don't want them to fluctuate a lot. It also has in this Vanguard document that they did this neat thing just to show this. They took all of the data between 1988 and 2017, and they found all of the months that were the worst performers, the bottom 10% of stock performance by month for that almost 30-year time frame. And it turns out the two things that have the greatest variance from that terrible stock performance, one is U.S. Treasury bonds, which is part of the portfolio, and that's why it's there, because the worse bonds do, or the worse stocks do, generally the better you do in U.S. Treasuries. Again, this is for a U.S.-based investor. And it was interesting that the second best category was international bonds hedged. So hedged international bonds was the second best category of positive return when the U.S. stock market was significantly down. So we use those for the purpose of having money available to you when markets go down. If markets go down and the currency rates fluctuate and cause you problems with your international bonds, they're now not there to be part of the cushion. So to wrap up in summary, for a U.S.-based investor, do not concern yourself with stock hedging or currency hedging on your stock investments in international stocks. But for bonds, you should. Again, I'm not sure how one does that on an individual level. That's why you should have a fund, and the Vanguard International Bond and Emerging Market Bond Funds. And I double-checked. I was pretty sure of this, but I just double-checked. They do hedge against currency rate fluctuations. So that's all that. Now, as far as an international investor, or I guess someone not inside the United States, again, I am not an expert on this. You might want to seek out other opinions. I'll keep my comments vague, but hopefully helpful. Something for you to think about, but you're going to need to do your own research, and don't really rely on what I'm saying too much, please. If you are in another country, I generally think that you should have a large portion of your investments in your own country. What does that mean by large? So in the United States, 10 years ago, I was 10% international, and now I'm up to 25% international. If you are in another country, you might want to have 50 or 60% of your investments international. And you might ask yourself, why so high? Because your country, as part of the global economy, is much smaller than the United States is. Depending on who you ask, the United States is 50 to 60% of the global economy. Some people might even say 40, but we're somewhere around the middle. If you're in another country, you're not somewhere around the middle. You're going to be a much smaller part, and that depends on the country you're in. So you'd have to do your studying on that. But a bulk of your money in your local economy, in your local currency, investing in all the stocks and bonds that are available in your country through some kind of index fund if you can. Now, whether that number is 20% or 50% or 60%, I don't really have a good answer for you. I'm so sorry. But you want to invest internationally so you get every other country in the world, including the United States, which has the most predictable, at least in the long run, returns, at least of the countries that I've studied. So you want to have a good chunk, and maybe you can buy a U.S. index fund, and a lot of other countries, bigger economies, actually have their own Vanguard webpage, and you can buy index funds for the United States stock market. Now it comes to, again, the question of whether you should hedge those stock investments. And I'm torn here because if so much more of your money is internationally, you're going to induce volatility, and the volatility is going to be the bulk of your investment portfolio. So it might be something to think about. What is your time frame? If you're retiring in 20 or 30 years, don't worry about the stock hedging. Just don't worry about it because it evens out in the long run. If it's 10 years, 15 years, maybe you want to hedge some because you might need some of those stocks, or you might want some of those stocks. So one thing that you can do is you can kind of take both avenues. You can have a U.S. Total Stock Market Index fund that's not hedged, and a U.S. Total Stock Market Index fund that is hedged. Split it down the middle. I don't know. Maybe the closer you get, the more hedging you want to do to reduce that volatility a little bit overall in your portfolio. And if you're in another country and you're investing in bonds internationally, I would still want the hedging. Because if something happens to your local currency, that change, that variation could be way more than the yields that you're supposed to get on international bonds, and completely wipe out. And so now you're betting on your local currency, which the point of the international bonds was to create diversification, not double down on your own personal currency. So I guess in all cases, I want international bond funds or bond funds outside of your native currency to be hedged. Look for that. You might have to dig deep. You might have to go into the prospectus and Google that fund, or call that fund company that you have and say, is this international bond fund hedged? And they may have to get back to you. It's not necessarily an easy thing to find out. I know that Vanguard's international bond funds sold to U.S. citizens are hedged. I do not know if that's the case in other countries. You're going to have to do that grunt work on your own. So international bonds, I'm going to insist that they're hedged. International stock funds, I'm not that worried about it. I'm particularly not worried about it if you're a U.S. investor, because international is probably not going to be, at least in my current thought process, no more than 25% of your total stock portfolio, which if you have 30 or 40% in bonds, again, you don't have 25% of your total portfolio. You have 25% of your stock portfolio. So I'm not too worried about it. If you're in another country and you have the majority of your stock investments in international stocks outside of your specific country, consider hedging some of that stock investment. Again, if you're a really long-term investor, 20, 30, 40 years from now, if you're young, I'm not worried about it that much. But the closer you get to retirement, I would get a little more concerned. So hopefully that helped, this little short segment on the need or the effect of currency hedging on international stock and bond investing. And like I said, I'm going to have 2 links in the show notes. Go check them out if you're really interested. If you want more detail, you could always email me, Phil@Polaris Financial Planning, and maybe we could have a talk about your situation. But again, if you're not in the United States, you might want to seek out somebody who actually is an expert in your country and know what they actually are talking about, not just me making some educated guesses. So wrapping up, that's the end of currency hedging for investing.
I've always been an atheist. I simply, as time went on, I became more interested in American intellectual history, and I felt that the secular side of our history was very much underrepresented in readable, popular history books. So that's how I got into it. I am not an atheist propagandist in that I'm not interested in converting people to atheism. What I'm interested in is talking about what the secular side of our history has meant to the development of the United States.
And what has the secular side of the development of our history meant for the development of the United States?
Well, it's something that's not talked about much because we've got all these people going blah, blah, blah about how this was founded as a Christian nation. But it wasn't founded as a Christian nation, although we were overwhelmingly a majority Christian people at the time the Constitution was written. But what did the founders do in the Constitution? They made a break with all previous documents, including the state constitutions at the time after the Revolution, and they didn't mention God. They didn't say that governmental power flows from God. They said, we the people. The word God does not appear in the Constitution at all, which always astonishes my college audiences when I tell them that, which tells you how badly American history is taught. In fact, what's generally taught about the origins of the United States is everybody who came here for religious liberty, which is true. But initially, before we became the United States and were colonial America, the people who came here for religious liberty came here for religious liberty for themselves, not for anybody else. So the first thing the Puritans did in Massachusetts was try to get rid of everybody who didn't agree with them. However, the founders had a very different view, which is because there were already people of so many different faiths here, we needed to have no state faith. So they just left it out altogether of the Constitution. The First Amendment was made specifically to protect religion from government. The Constitution itself, which leaves God out, was meant to protect government from religion. The two go together.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Are index funds too big? Do they own too much of the market? Can they break everything by becoming too big? That's a question that I get asked a pretty good amount of time, and it's pretty easy to find articles written about this topic, but they're almost always saying index funds are too big and that they are half of all mutual funds. Or there's some problems with the growth and the size and controlling market trades. And these are things that are worthy of discussion and worthy of thinking about, and we've talked about them a little bit before. But often the people that are writing those posts have something to gain by you not indexing. They might have managed funds, or they manage funds themselves, or they work for a company that managed funds. So I always read them with a grain of salt and try to consider the other side. Well, recently, Tim Buckley, who is the Vanguard chairman and CEO, see, he gets both titles, did a nice story, and it's posted on the Vanguard website. And I think if you just Google Vanguard Tim Buckley, Buckley, and this title, Don't Stop Believing in the Benefits of Indexing. Now, he goes over all the wonderful reasons you should own index funds. We've talked about that before, so I'm not going to go over that here. But the other part of his article is about how big are index funds compared to other mutual funds and the market itself. So the numbers that he gives is that index funds are about 40% of all mutual funds. And that's the kind of information that people often present as it's already too big. And there's the sky is falling pending doom. Well, the interesting thing is that index funds might be 40% of all mutual funds, but a lot of people invest without using mutual funds at all. And they just buy individual stocks. And often people who have index funds sometimes have managed funds and sometimes buy individual stocks on top of it. So if you look at all of the stock ownership, not just mutual funds, index funds only account for 15% of all stocks in the United States. And if you look at trading activity, which is really where the concern might come with index funds, because if all of the trades are by index funds, where is the check and balance of individual people buying and selling stocks? Trades made by index funds represent less than 5% of all trading activity of stocks within the United States. So while they are 40% of the total market of all mutual funds are index funds, only 15% of all stocks are owned in index funds, and less than 5% of the trading activity is done by those index funds. And since I'm on that topic, something to remember is that there are many, many, many stock index funds. So a lot of people get concerned that if a stock falls out of the S&P 500, does it create this panic run on that stock where it gets sold and its price could be driven into the ground because it's now no longer in the S&P 500? If that was the only index, there would be merit to that argument. But there are total stock market indexes. There's a mid-cap index. And of course, if a company falls from large cap to mid-cap, all the large cap funds would be inclined to sell it, but all the mid-cap funds would be inclined to buy it. So there's pressure on both sides when stocks go up and or down. They just switch from one index fund to another. So index funds have very little effect on the positive or negative pressure of stock prices. And according to this, less than 5% of all trades are index funds, and they're generally not driving the price one way or the other. So 95% of the trades are still done by trusts, foundations, individual people who are buying and selling the stock. And of course, every time a stock is bought and sold, someone's going to be right and someone's going to be wrong. So you still have that force keeping the market in check. And I don't think index funds are going to make it run away and get crazy for a future pending crisis. So just a little bit on index funds, and are they too big? The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
Dan Widdicombe says slavery has to be considered in context. What's more relative than that? There were people at the time, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, there were innumerable humanists and secularists who said slavery is evil. The church wouldn't agree. Now, which is it then? Is it that the church is wrong, or, even more suggestive, that God has not yet revealed that it's wrong to them? Or did God support it all those years and then change his mind? From a beginning point of absurdity, you arrive at a terminal point of absolute moral chaos. And I think you've at least done us the favor of making that plain this evening. God, in short, God did not make man in his own image. It is precisely to the contrary. Mammals and primates made many gods and many churches in their own rival images.
Welcome back, everybody. Today I have Curt Carstensen. Did I do that right, Curt?
You did. You did it awfully slowly to make sure you got it right, but it was correct.
Well, I was listening to your show, and you say it pretty quick compared to me, and I thought about doing it. Carstensen. But why don't you tell people your name and, of course, your podcast so they can find it and listen to it?
Well, I am Curt Carstensen, and the podcast is called People I Know Show. It'll be probably pretty much anywhere else someone would already be listening to a podcast. Plus, you can find it from peopleiknowshow.com and go from there. And it is a podcast. It's labeled a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. But in addition to that, I think the bigger thing, especially lately, is I'm really emphasizing the influential people in my life, something that I think I got away from during a few episodes. I just talked to interesting people that I knew that didn't necessarily influence me in particular, but now I've been angling back to the people that really impacted my life in different ways.
Well, I've listened to a couple episodes preparing for our call, and of course, I was on episode number 6 about a year ago. Thank you for the invitation. Of course, I appreciate it very much. And it sounds like you do something similar to what I do, where you're having nice long-form interviews and really getting to know the person you're talking to and having an experience together.
Well, yes, Phil, because you are one of the people that influenced me early on in starting my podcast, and you were one of the podcasts when I didn't listen to a lot of podcasts. I listened to yours, and I enjoyed that about yours. And some of the other ones that I've listened to that, even though I didn't really know you much then, and I guess I've gotten to know you a little bit better since then, and a lot of the podcasts, I don't know the people that I'm listening to, but by listening to them for an hour or so, you get to know somebody and have a chance to connect with whatever it is in the world that they're dealing with and possibly, hopefully, learn from them. And that's something I thought, well, I could put towards the world in the things that I've learned and the people that I've met. And that is, in a way, how my podcast came to be.
Well, one of the things I want to do, and hopefully you have an answer. If not, we can edit this part out. But on your show, you ask people, and you definitely asked me, something that I thought I knew about, but I was wrong. What can you come up with that you thought you knew or you were certain of that you found out you were wrong and had to fix it?
Well, basically every topic of every episode ends up coming down towards something that I was wrong about, and that is why I've chosen the guest that's influenced me, and having them explain their life and me explain what they've influenced my thinking on, really changed my thinking on, because I can look back on my life and think about all these things I was wrong about. I think the biggest one will be and has been the fact that I am an atheist now, and which has obviously attracted me to your show and some of the other shows that I listen to, that I grew up in a way, thinking in a way that was put out to me, and I accepted it for a fairly long time. And it's very difficult for me, and probably for most people, to unravel what we've learned and make it be not true, especially with the different influences around us. So I think the big one that made me think, okay, I've been wrong about this huge thing, and everyone's wrong about many things, is the fact that I believed in God because that's what I thought was the right thing to do, and I thought it was true. But as life continues, I learn different things, and now that is one part of me that I want to show who's ever willing to listen that I was wrong about, other people have been wrong about. But that's one of many, many things that I've been wrong about, that I want to just make sure that someone else knows that I was wrong about this other thing, and maybe someone else is wrong about it too, or a lot of people are wrong about it. Maybe I'm still wrong about my new thinking. I'm not saying I know everything by any means, but I think it is important to have conversations around the things that we have changed our mind about or might be willing to change our minds about.
Well, I know it's one of the things that I use as a divider to group people, and maybe it's not a fair thing for me to do, but someone who is not willing to ever change or admit a mistake is someone I find less desirable to know more about, and someone who admits mistakes and someone who changes their mind over time when new information is provided is someone I'm more likely to want to spend time with. Of course, there's exceptions to everything. And you talked about religion, losing your confidence in religion. When did that happen? Was it 6 years of age, 30 years of age? How did that happen?
It was an extremely long process. It began sometime while I was a teenager. I think back to a few moments of my memory that I hope are true at this point, because I don't always trust my memory or anyone's memory at this point. But sometime as a teenager, for the first time, after growing up with the thought of, if I don't do these certain things that I'm told, I'm going to hell. And then I thought, all these other people in the world that don't do these things are going to hell. And then my thinking somehow changed to, wait, what if these people that believe something else, believe things I don't even understand at all, that they are right and I'm wrong? And what if I go to hell because what I'm believing is actually the wrong thing? And that led me just further down this critical thinking path to realize I don't really know enough. So once I was confirmed, had my confirmation grade 10 as a Catholic, that was the last time I really needed to go to church. My parents were okay with me not attending, but it wasn't like I gave up everything. I just lost interest. And from there, I suppose it was about a 15-year journey through my mind of just slowly backing away from everything until I eventually decided to get into researching and understanding and learning about the things that so many people ahead of me had learned, that it's just almost certainly not true, almost any of it. And the things that are true doesn't mean that God or Jesus existed in the way that we're told, that there's just things that we don't understand and others have come up with explanations for. And some of those explanations have been marketed in their own way very well over 2,000 years and remain true in many people's minds today, but it doesn't mean that they're true in reality. And it just was a really long journey for me. And I can understand how other people are at any point in that journey, because I was a believer for a long time. And even when I didn't believe specifically in the Catholic Church, I still thought I believed in God for a long time, and just in a different way. So I can relate to people not really knowing what to do with this topic, because it's the big one, and for all kinds of reasons built into us as a child, it can be hard to separate ourselves from. But for me, after a very long time, I finally came to the point where I was able to call myself an atheist, and then a couple of years later, within the last couple of years, comfortable calling myself an atheist to other people.
Well, that's nice. Yeah, that's a nice evolution. I know that for me, it was about a year, so I did it a little quicker. Not that it's any better. Everyone has their own experience and their own family and their own things they've got to deal with and prioritize things. But I did have for a while that when people would ask me, I would say something like, I wish God was true. And I don't even wish that anymore, at least not in any kind of God that I've heard about or understand. And the whole concept to me is so nonsensical. And I think part of the reason I study it or talk to Christians so much or atheists so much about the topic is because I can't wrap my head around the fact that people actually do believe it. It kind of weirds me out. I can, I guess. I can, because what is brought up in our lives when we're so young, for some people, like my parents, my family, we weren't hardcore into it. So I think that's what allowed me to kind of think differently. I think oftentimes I realized what was most important wasn't that we believed in a certain way, as that the people around us thought we believed in a certain way. And I think that helped me get away from thinking everything was definitely true the way it was presented to me. But I know other kids, other people are in situations where it is very clear that the way to believe, the way that they believe is correct. And the chances, opportunities to think differently just might not be there for them. So I agree with you that if we separate it from our lives now and look at some of the stories and think, how did anyone ever believe this? But I understand how you could, as a child, are told stories and believe them. And when the adults around you also believe them, you don't need to let that story go if it fits into your lifestyle. But for me, I'm grateful that I was able to break away from that. But I truly understand why people do believe. Sure. And do you see one of your missions as helping people free themselves from religious thought?
That is one of the things I think I can do. I don't know that it has to be the thing. I just want people to recognize that whatever they think now on any topic, whether it's based on religion or something else entirely, that it might not be true, because I do take that to heart for myself. Like my religious beliefs now, or lack thereof, I'm not even positive they're precise in any way. I've realized I've come a long ways and changed my thinking a lot. And I don't take credit thinking I'm right about everything. I do, though, recognize where I have changed my mind. And maybe other people do this as well, but I want to present to others that you can change your mind, and it's not a bad thing. You can tell people that you've changed your mind and that you were wrong about something. And although that's kind of scary, depending on what you're saying, it doesn't need to be. And other people have also changed their minds on big topics. And I just want that to be okay. So when we have conversations where someone is being tested on something they really hold strongly to be true, if we can live in a world and in conversations and with other people that are more okay with considering that maybe something that they believe in isn't quite what they believe or what they think, then these conversations can have more impact and people can grow in ways that if we're all really firm on our beliefs, we're just not going to get anywhere. And it just, so much of it feels like a waste of time.
Well, it's interesting. The other thing that popped into my head is another thing that I look at grouping people. If someone has made an effort to learn a second language, because I've recently done that, it to me creates a whole different mindset, because when you learn a new language, particularly as an adult, you're wrong so often. I mean, just like every sentence, every couple of words, it is so hard to learn a second language, at least for me as an adult, that someone who's willing to do that, someone who's willing to pick up their lives, maybe move to a different country, including the United States, and learn a different language, I see that as a person I'd like to know more about. I see that as a person I'd rather spend time with or get to know versus a person who's always lived in the one spot that they've always lived, and they learned the one language that they learned, and they don't want to know about anything else. What do you think about that?
Well, yes, I have traveled a lot in recent years. I went from growing up in a way where I didn't travel and thought I didn't want to travel to within the last 5 years, I think my country totals up to like 19. I've been going quite a bit, a few countries per year if possible. And just when I go to these places with the different cultures and the different languages, it makes me realize, I barely know anything. I pull me out of my element, and I realize, and in a whole nother level, there's so much more to learn, that other people have learned to do something totally differently. And it makes me more motivated to learn another language, although I find it very difficult to prioritize that when there's so much else going on. You did find a way to do that, and I find that to be very admirable. I think it's both the interacting, traveling, I think, learning another language, but I think more than anything for me is seeing people come to this country and getting to know people in this country that came here not knowing English, and how difficult it was for them to learn English, but having learned it, and how they're interacting now compared to previously. A few episodes ago on my podcast, I had a lady named Hodan Noor, who is a Somali immigrant who's been in this country for 20 years, and I happened to be one of her tutors for her GED that she was studying for just a couple of years ago. And getting to know her and her story, and the fact that for all kinds of reasons, she found it very difficult and frightening to even pursue her education, didn't have an education, didn't know English. I met her at about year 17 of her being in the United States. But for the first probably 5 or 10 years, there's no way I could have communicated with her and gotten along with her. But by the point that I had met her, she seems so much like me, but it's such a journey and so difficult. But she's just such a fun and open-minded person. And I think meeting people like that has changed my mind in so many areas, but also seeing how hard it is to learn another language. But the people that pursue it, I do think that does say something about them.
Yeah, I'm just now scrolling through some of your recent shows. You have someone on who is a mental health advocate. Walk me through that. What happened there?
Well, that individual is a friend of mine that I went to St. Cloud State with, and he's been a TV news reporter in the Twin Cities. It started at a pretty young age. For several years, he's taken a different role within the television station in the Twin Cities now, and has put some more focus back onto a side project of his called the Refresh Network, focusing on some of his mental health struggles, but also kind of telling the stories through other people that he hasn't met. And in that case, with Brian, we entered the conversation kind of talking about that, but I found that conversation, in addition to me like learning stuff about mental health and the things that he's dealt with and other people are dealing with that I didn't understand yet, something that we talked about in that conversation was he was one of 3 people that I went to college with that were my friends that I thought were straight until one day at a party about 10 years ago, they all came out to me within 5 or 10 minutes. And that was one of the most mind-blowing experiences of my life, because I was small town Minnesota guy. Whatever views I had on gay people certainly weren't positive. They were either neutral or negative. And then suddenly I was presented with a situation where I went in one moment knowing nobody that was gay to a few minutes later knowing 3 of my friends are gay, and just the way it struck me and having to deal with the fact that, now I have these thoughts on gay people. I have these 3 friends that I like. What am I going to do with this? That was something that I think we all can deal with in some ways. And I think when it comes to religion, I think maybe some people who I tell I'm an atheist to them and they're not comfortable with that, and they've always been told that atheists are bad, but they like me otherwise. They probably are presented with something similar, I'm guessing, maybe not. And I have that conversation. I have these different conversations with people that have struck me in some way. But I think that one, not only learning about mental health and obsessive compulsive disorder, and I thought I understood it, but then I realized I didn't really understand it. And then that part of that conversation, just going through this process, talking to these different people and having them on my show, it's been just one of the most fulfilling things I've done probably in my life. And there's just so many more people that I know that have influenced me that I'll get to talk to. And I'd hope that people find these conversations and enjoy the long-form conversations like you and I must, the fact that we have these within our podcast, because I think there's just a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I really like it. And a lot of podcasts are, of course, a person or 2 or 3 doing news and stories, and those are awesome and they have their place. But I do kind of like getting to know people and their interviews. And I'm also fascinated, show 30 you did back in May, Free Thought Toastmasters. What is that?
Well, you're familiar with Toastmasters.
I am. I'm a competent Toastmaster.
Okay. So Toastmasters is all over the place everywhere, but somehow, fortunately for me, when I decided I wanted to join Toastmasters, I did a little search in the Twin Cities area and found that there is a club called Free Thought Toastmasters. And I looked into this, and it is founded by a now friend of mine, George Francis Kane, who is an atheist and wanted, and also a big into Toastmasters, and wanted a club for people like him to be able to give speeches on topics that probably aren't really okay with a lot of clubs. And he founded this club over 20 years ago. And I had him on at that time because we were having our open house. But I've been in that club for over 2 years and met a lot of community people for me, people that don't think commonly that we are free thought. Not everyone's necessarily an atheist, but people that just are willing to think a little bit differently and talk about subjects in a different way, that they're my people. That's my place that I go to twice a month and give speeches and just hang out for a little bit and get to know everybody a little bit better. And I feel very fortunate that he is in my area and started that club, because I don't think that exists everywhere. I know people that are searching for an atheist type of community. There are options, but that was just a really convenient option for me where I could go hang out with people that I can connect with, but also practice my public speaking.
Absolutely. And I'm assuming then you would recommend Toastmasters to people who are listening?
I would recommend Toastmasters, yes, to anybody. Leading up to knowing that I might have a podcast, and who knows what the podcast will do for me, and people asking like me to possibly speak in front of some group in the future, that hasn't happened yet. But I thought if someone asked me to do that, I want to be like pretty good, better than I used to be, better than I would have been otherwise. So I decided getting better at public speaking is only going to be something useful at some point, if not far, far down the road.
Absolutely. In case listeners didn't know, I was in Toastmasters many years ago, enjoyed it immensely, and I also highly recommend it, not just if you're scared to give a talk and want to have some practice, but even a person who considers themselves to be a good presenter, a good speaker, you can still learn things. And maybe if you've learned so much that you don't think you have anything to learn, you could help others. And Toastmasters is a very nice way to do that. I had great experiences with that. And I hadn't even thought about it much lately. And now I'm thinking maybe I should find one in my area because it was quite a joy to do.
It is. And it's something that it's almost anyone, no matter how busy they are, probably could find a club that has their time start. A lot of clubs either once a week or mine's 2 times a month. And you could search your area, and if it's at all populated, you'll find plenty of clubs and something that'll probably fit your schedule often enough that'll be worth your while to join.
And I'm looking through this list of shows, and it just seems like a random list of fun things and interesting people to talk to. Anything that we haven't talked about that jumps into your mind, a show from a while back maybe that everyone should start with or find?
Well, I think the only one that if I said you should start with one of them, it would be my first episode. My friend George and I he's been my main travel companion, and I used to be afraid of pretty much everything. I maybe that's going a little bit too far, but for instance, it was, I guess, just over 4 years ago, he and I traveled to Spain and then France. The reason for that trip was because George had this lifelong dream of running with the bulls in Pamplona. A dream that I did not have at all. I didn't want to do it, but I also thought I can't not go. And eventually I went, and then eventually I ran with the bulls in Pamplona. And that was one of a few cases with him. By being with someone that pushed me to do things that I would have otherwise been afraid to do. I feel like my life is so much more enriched by just living my life. And I wanted to show George to the world because I don't know where I'd be without him. But he, along the line of pretty much everyone I've had on, I think they've added something to my life. So just in case someone out there hasn't had someone impact them on this similar topic in the same way, I want to put the people I know in my People I Know show out to the world. And I guess a couple other ones briefly that I'd noted was I have a family that I'm friends with, and one of their kids has had maybe the most extreme behavior problems I've ever heard of. But then every time I'd see him, he was like normal. So I talked with he and his dad and his mom. That was episode 12 with the Berg family, and just got a better sense of the fact that, sometimes you see somebody, you know that someone's got some issues, and from a distance, you think you can like blame the parents or whatever we always do when we don't have enough information. We think we just come to conclusions and judgments, and that I thought was a good example of the fact that so often we don't know anything. Why are we judging these situations that we don't understand? And a couple other ones briefly. Episode 31 with Corey Hollenhorst. He has a son that has Down syndrome, and I think for a long time my perception of Down syndrome and people that have that disability was one way, and then I would see him post things on Facebook, and I thought, oh, my mind's changing on this. I need to talk to Corey about it. So that's something that we get into. I guess one more I'll mention is Terry Henry. That was episode 36. She is a lady I used to work with. She's since retired to a reservation in southern Manitoba, a part of her tribe, her First Nation tribe up there, but she grew up American Indian mostly in Minnesota. And just talking to her and understanding, of course, a long time ago, we know that there is all kinds of atrocities to the Native people, but a lot of this has happened much more recently than we think. And her family has some experience with that, and just getting to know her and realizing, okay, here's another thing. I don't know anything about this, but yet I used to think I knew something. So talking to someone that actually knows something about a topic and trying to explain it to me, I find very useful. So if I'm having that experience at my age, I figure other people probably have some misconceptions as well.
Excellent. And are you available to give a talk or a presentation at a conference or anything?
I absolutely would be. I'm waiting for the first person to ask me. I'm new enough to putting myself out to the world that no one's asked me yet, but I'd love to.
And how can they reach you?
Well, there are many ways to reach me, probably through the People I Know Show Facebook or Instagram pages or YouTube page, or peopleiknowshow@gmail.com, or search Curt Carstensen. And there aren't too many of us out there. Maybe there's one other guy somewhere. So most of what comes up on Google when you search my name or Facebook, it'll be me, and you can reach out to me that way.
Excellent. Is there anything else we should know about you or the show?
No, I don't think so. As you mentioned, it's kind of random fun topics from one week to the next, depending on how well prepared in advance. I don't even know who I'm going to have on, but as I reach out to different people from my life that have influenced me, I think some of it's going to be relatable to most people, and I'm hoping a lot of it is also relatable, and that in some way, me sharing my stories through the people that have impacted me will both be useful and fun and interesting to someone that listens, but also this was a thing that was sticking in the back of my mind, like, oh, maybe I should do this someday. I don't know if I can when or how, and it seems difficult. It's something I finally did to like take a step forward to do something different and bigger than what I used to do, and I just find that to be a powerful story in itself. So if anyone out there is thinking that they want to do more, can do more with their life, you can. And the thing that's probably weighing you down the heaviest is probably the thing you should go for first and just make it happen and see what you learn from it. And that's what I've been going through for the last year or so. And it's been really enriching in my life.
Well, Curt, thank you for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. And of course, listeners, it's People I Know Show. I'm looking at it here and iTunes, but it's of course available on any major podcast player. And of course, you said the website, the Facebook group, all kinds of different things. I appreciate what you're doing and the fact that you're helping people. It's very important.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you for being on early on when I was still trying to figure things out with it in episode 6. And I think that was a good episode. And some of my friends in my life, they tell me about the fact that they've been thinking about reaching out to you and they haven't yet, but I probably can give them a little boost when they hear me back on your show now.
There you go. Of course, I'd be happy to talk to them, and thank you again for coming on.
Thanks, Phil.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. I do greatly appreciate it. If you like the show and you want to support the show, there's a couple of different things you can do. One, you can go leave a 5-star review. The two places that I am aware of are iTunes and Stitcher. So you can go to Stitcher.com or go into your iTunes app, at least while it still exists. Go into your iTunes app and leave a 5-star review and a little comment. And if you're lucky, if you're very, very lucky, I'll read it on the show. So that's one way you can show your appreciation for the show. Another thing you can do is go to patreon.com/Phil, Phil. Couldn't make it much more simple than that. Patreon.com/Phil, and you can sign up to become a patron of the show. You can give as little as $1 per show or as much as you want per show. It doesn't matter to me. Bigger is better, I guess. It's just one of those things that offsets a little bit the time and effort in me putting together the show. If I do a best of the Phil Ferguson Show, there's no charge for that. And of course, if I skip a week or two, there's no charge for that either. But new episode, new content like this one, you will be charged the amount that you've agreed to contribute. And I greatly appreciate that. It's the show can be anything from 2 or 3 hours of work in a week to 10 hours of work in a week. So it is relatively time consuming. I love doing it and I love helping people out. One other thing, if you have questions about your portfolio, you may contact me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Send me an email. Send me your phone number in the email. That's really important because I'd like to talk podcast. And we can talk about your situation. If you then want to send me documents or information after you've confirmed that you've really reached me, that's okay. I just had someone break my rule. They sent me their portfolio. I haven't opened it because it just came in. So hopefully it has no revealing personal information like addresses or social security numbers or account numbers or stuff like that. But I'd really rather you make sure you actually have the right email address and confirmed with me that we have connected before you send anything that might contain that kind of information. So we're going to wrap up the show. Let's see. It's July 2019. I'm not going into anything specific for the next couple of months, but in the fall, as I talked about way back when at the beginning of the show, In October, I will be at the Center for Inquiries Conference, SciCon in Las Vegas. And of course, we will be having a pay your own way meeting of friends of the Phil Ferguson Show at 4:30 on Thursday, October 17th. If you want more information about that, go back to the early part of the show or send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. I do hope to see you out there on the road somewhere soon. Until then, ciao